Hello, my name's Daniel. Thank you for being here with me today. If you enjoy real, heartbreaking cheating stories from Reddit, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. It really means a lot to me. This is a story that feels heavier the more you think about it. One of those tales where something small and silly grows into something bitter, leaving everyone feeling a little more worn down than before. It begins in the quiet town of Bar Harbor, Maine, where a 35-year-old woman named Claire was just trying to pull herself out of a fog. She'd been dragging through her days, feeling disconnected and low, when her office announced a walking competition during their weekly staff meeting. It sounded simple enough. Track your steps for 20 workdays. If everyone averaged at least 5,000 steps a day, the whole group would earn a half day off on Fridays. But the big prize dangled in front of them, an Apple Watch for the person with the most steps, made it feel like more than just a friendly challenge. Claire loved running, something she hadn't done much of lately, and the competition felt like a chance to find herself again. She asked if running steps counted, and Mason, the 40-year-old coworker who volunteered to manage the contest, told her they did. It was the motivation she needed. She set a lofty goal for herself, 20,000 steps a day, enough to make her feel confident she'd take the lead. But the very first day, she saw a name she didn't expect above hers. David, 38, had logged 23,000. She laughed, sent him a friendly message on Teams, something like, "It's on." The next day, she pushed harder, posting 24,000. He came back with 25,000. It became a silent duel, playful but serious. Soon, another coworker, Jenna, 29, joined in, and suddenly the three of them were trading daily messages, sharing details of their workouts, comparing routes, encouraging each other through exhaustion. By the second week, it felt like one of them would win, and everyone else in the office was still benefiting. Everyone would get that promised half-day off. But then, one afternoon, Claire checked the shared log and froze. Out of nowhere, another coworker, Tessa, who had been steadily logging around 10,000 to 15,000 steps per day, entered a shocking number: 655,000 steps in a single day. For perspective, Claire's marathon last year had totaled around 52,000 steps. The number made no sense, but she hesitated. Maybe, somehow, Tessa had run an ultramarathon. Claire messaged her, trying to be polite. "That's a lot of steps. What's your secret?" Tessa explained she played volleyball and wanted to count the steps from her games, but she couldn't safely wear her phone or watch while playing. To help, Mason found a chart online listing step equivalents for various activities. Volleyball was 89 steps per minute, tennis was 133, and so on. Fair enough, Claire thought, though something felt off. She did the math. For Tessa's total to be true, she would have had to play volleyball for nearly 8 hours straight. She sent another message, light but questioning. "Wow, so you must have played forever." She responded, "Well, I also rode my bike." That's when Claire's stomach sunk. Bike riding. Claire pressed a little more and discovered Tessa wasn't just using the chart for volleyball, she was using it for everything. Bike rides, stretching, yoga, even washing dishes. All of it was being converted into steps. Claire couldn't shake how wrong it felt. She told Tessa, as gently as she could, "I don't think that's really in the spirit of the competition." Then she went straight to Mason and asked, very carefully, whether bike riding counted. He didn't hesitate. No, it didn't count. It was too different, too unfair. Not everyone had a bike. Claire thanked him for clarifying and mentioned that maybe Tessa needed that same clarification. Not 2 minutes later, her screen pinged. A new message from Tessa. "Really? You complained about me? That's actually not in the spirit of the competition. I lost a pet recently. I've been so depressed. I've been struggling to lose weight, and I was proud of my steps from yesterday. Not everyone can be a marathon runner like you. Really uncool." Claire sat there staring at the message, her excitement about the competition fading into something heavy. She had expected maybe annoyance, maybe denial, but not this sudden wave of guilt, this attempt to make her feel cruel for pointing out what everyone already knew. And just like that, something meant to be light-hearted felt sharp. The competition that was supposed to bring people together ended up pulling them apart. It didn't just create tension between Claire and Tessa, it spread through the office like a low, constant hum of resentment. Groups that were meant to encourage each other ended up snapping under the pressure. Some employees were furious that others weren't pulling their weight, muttering about colleagues who only managed a few thousand steps a day. It reminded Claire of a man she met on her evening runs, an older guy named Patrick, who walked to deal with his own stress. He once told her his workplace had done a similar competition. He'd walked for hours every day, logging 30 to 40,000 steps, while others barely managed 2,000. He confessed how the bitterness built up in him week after week. He'd start each walk with the hope that it would calm him, but by the end he was only angrier, muttering about how unfair it all was. Patrick's story made Claire realize how quickly something fun could become ugly. And in her own office, that ugliness was creeping in. Online commenters were quick to weigh in when she shared her side of things later. One person wrote that the company itself was the problem, for making employees compete for something as small as a half-day off. But others pointed out that wasn't quite true. Everyone who participated would get that half-day off. The competition wasn't for the time off, it was for the Apple Watch. Wasn't it okay for a company to support healthy habits? That argument didn't make Claire feel any better. Tessa's behavior had shifted things. What could have been friendly turned into suspicion and irritation. And when Mason, the competition manager, stepped in to talk with her, it didn't go well. Claire heard later from him that Tessa had been combative and rude, so much so that he had to involve Jill from HR. Jill's solution was a compromise no one felt good about. She ruled that Tessa could keep her 65,000-step day, a number so absurd it almost felt like a joke, and the rules would just be clarified going forward. It was meant to close the matter, but it didn't. Tessa kept logging 35,000 to 45,000 steps every single day after that. Not as outrageous as before, but still wildly unrealistic. They all sat at desks 8 hours a day. No one could figure out how she was supposedly racking up that many steps unless she was pacing her living room for hours each night. Claire and the others, David and Jenna, kept posting high numbers, trying to keep up. Before Tessa's sudden spike, all three of them had been ahead of her, but that one magic day had changed everything. Then, as if the universe wanted to test their patience even further, David got sick. He managed only 4,000 steps one day. It was enough to push him out of the race. The next blow came for Claire herself. Work exploded. An unexpected, time-consuming project kept her chained to her desk for hours. She barely managed 10,000 steps that day. It wasn't nearly enough. Suddenly, it wasn't just Tessa and her inflated numbers. It was Claire herself slipping behind. That left Jenna, who threw herself into the competition as if it were life or death. She got up at 4 a.m., laced her shoes in the dark, and walked through sleepy streets, pushing herself to the edge. She logged more than 40,000 steps on some days, her feet aching by the end. The highest she reached was about 41,000, but it wasn't enough. In the end, after all the spreadsheets and step logs, the encouragement and the anger, the early mornings and late-night walks, Tessa won. By just 250 steps. The number felt like a knife twist, close enough to hurt more than a blowout loss ever could. And Tessa? She didn't seem to feel the weight of what she'd done. Tessa had no hesitation standing in front of everyone at the company-wide meeting, a smile plastered on her face as she accepted the prize. She didn't flinch, didn't blush, didn't even seem to realize the shadow her win had cast over the entire office. She held up the sleek Apple Watch like it was some grand symbol of effort, and then she launched into a speech that made Claire's stomach twist. Tessa praised everyone for their dedication and talked about how, in the end, we're all just healthier now, and that's what matters. The words were hollow, cloying, the kind of thing you say when you want to look gracious without actually being genuine. Claire sat there in the back, silent, staring at the ground, feeling her own energy drain away. She never responded to the message Tessa had sent earlier, the one about being depressed after her dog died, the one that tried to turn this into Claire's cruelty rather than Tessa's dishonesty. Claire couldn't bring herself to engage. This was her job. She wasn't about to let herself get pulled into some ugly fight over a watch in a few hours off on a Friday afternoon. But the avoidance didn't make the bitterness fade. Commenters online didn't hold back when Claire shared the story later. One bluntly quoted the words Mason had used to describe Tessa, combative and rude, and said that should have been enough for HR to hold a meeting and disqualify her. Claire agreed. She wrote back almost flatly that Tessa had gotten away with things like this before, in situations far more serious than a step competition. That was what she couldn't wrap her head around. How did she keep slipping through the cracks? Another commenter, Grimmel, put it in harsher words. HR is in her pocket. Claire read it twice, unsure if it was an exaggeration or an uncomfortable truth. One sarcastic voice, St. Elvis, quoted Jill's HR ruling. Tessa can keep her 65,000 steps, and simply wrote, boo. Another added that they'd tell her, with all the pettiness they could muster, that it was a good thing she'd won that Apple Watch so she could finally see how many steps she was really taking in a day. Others chimed in with their own scars. Someone named Spicy C shared that they quit a similar competition entirely because people in their office were logging 80,000 to 100,000 steps per day, numbers no one could reasonably hit when working full-time, and nothing was done about it. Complaints went nowhere. Shoulders shrugged. It was fine, they'd been told. Hearing that stung, because it sounded exactly like what Claire's office had done. Pretend it's fine. Let it slide. Move on. But Claire couldn't move on. Not really. The prize wasn't the point. The Apple Watch, the half-day, the title of winner, none of that was why she felt hollow every time she thought about the whole mess. It was the feeling that integrity didn't matter, that hard work didn't matter, that rules only applied to the people willing to follow them, while others twisted them and smiled for photos. The meeting ended with applause, because that's what everyone felt they had to do. Claire clapped too, softly, hands barely meeting, staring past the woman who had just claimed victory. The room felt smaller when it was over, the air heavy. And as Tessa walked out, prize in hand, Claire stayed seated for a moment longer, wishing she could shake off the feeling that something inside her had shifted, and not for the better. The words people sent her online were sharp enough to cut, but they weren't wrong. Some said it outright. "You're not her mother," one wrote. "She's nothing but an incubator, a vessel that held you for a time." The harshness was brutal, but it carried a raw truth. A mother isn't just someone who gives birth. A mother raises, loves, and protects. A mother puts her child before herself. A mother would give everything, her breath, her soul, to keep her children safe and happy. She read those words slowly, the ache in her chest growing with each line. "You aren't a mother," one comment continued, "and certainly not mine. I can throw you away like nothing because you are nothing. You're less than nothing. If you wanted someone to care for you, you should have shown that care first. I'm going to care for myself the way you never did. You can rot for all I care, end up in a ditch or a run-down home full of rats. It doesn't matter, because you are nothing to me." The brutal tone stung, but Claire couldn't ignore the bitter comfort in it. After sharing her story, Claire updated the post a day later. She hadn't expected what came next. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her estranged mother sent message after message, each one dripping with guilt and accusation. "You're heartless," one read. "I did the best I could." When she stopped responding, the call slowed, but the noise didn't. Her mother turned to extended family. Claire's inbox flooded with messages from relatives she hadn't heard from in years. They lined up to scold her, to shame her, to tell her she was wrong. "You're a disgrace," one cousin typed, as if she had any right. "Family is family no matter what," an aunt wrote. One message hit harder than the rest. "You'll regret this when she's gone." The word sat there like a cold hand on her chest, pressing down. And then came the part that made Claire feel not just angry, but hollow. Her father called her quietly, his voice low and tired. He told her what her mother had been saying behind her back, to family, to anyone who would listen. She'd rewritten the story. She claimed she'd been forced to leave Claire all those years ago. She painted herself as the victim, the one who had always wanted to stay. She told anyone who would listen that Claire's father had turned her daughter against her, poisoning her mind. The story wasn't just twisted, it was stolen. Claire sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the message thread, and felt something sharp and clear inside her. She wasn't going to let this drag her under anymore. She sent one final message, her fingers shaking but her words steady. "You abandoned me. You don't get to come back now and demand my love and care like nothing happened. I owe you nothing." Then she blocked her. The silence afterward felt strange, like standing outside after a storm. She didn't feel guilt. She didn't even feel conflicted. If anything, she felt lighter, freer, happier even, in a small and quiet way. Support poured in from strangers. One, a user named Lo, wrote, "That's the perfect way to handle a toxic situation. I'm glad you stood up for yourself." Another, Misty Puff, added, "Now she suddenly remembers she's a mother? Get the hell out of here with that nonsense. Family isn't just blood, it's showing up." And she didn't, not once. Others pointed out the obvious. Her husband left her. Her other children didn't step up. And why? "Seems like all of them went no contact," someone said flatly. Claire read the line 3 times. It felt like truth. Every message from family, every accusation, every plea for her to do the right thing melted into noise. Noise she didn't have to listen to anymore. Because she had made her choice, and for the first time in years, it felt like she'd chosen herself. The night she first said it, Claire's husband Daniel thought it was just a careless joke. He'd cooked them a late dinner, an ambitious dish that didn't quite work out, and they were both laughing, tipsy from wine. Then she said the words that would hang over them for years, that she wished her male coworker could cook for her every day. At first, he didn't really process it. The wine dulled the edges. He brushed it off, telling himself it was nothing. But the next morning, when the haze cleared, the weight of her comments sank in. It hurt. It made him feel small, inadequate, like all the effort he'd been pouring into something new had been for nothing. Claire noticed immediately. She apologized again and again, her voice cracking, tears close. Daniel told her they shouldn't make it a big deal, that it was fine, that they'd move on. But he also told her one thing he wouldn't take back. He'd never cook for her again. She cried softly, apologizing until the words felt empty. Daniel repeated it. It was all in the past. They'd move on. But they didn't. Not really. 2 years passed. Their relationship, on the surface, grew stronger. They laughed, they traveled, they celebrated birthdays. But under all of it, something stayed broken. Daniel had thrown himself into cooking, not for Claire, but for himself and for everyone else. He took lessons from his sister, who had always been the one in the family with an effortless touch in the kitchen. She showed him that patience mattered more than fancy tools, how you couldn't learn everything from the internet, how practice over and over would shape his hands into something steadier. He became good, better than he ever imagined. He cooked for friends, for his family, for Claire's family. He made a beautiful Valencian paella for Christmas, and everyone raved about it, telling him he had a gift. But he never cooked for Claire. Not once. Every time she asked, and she did ask, he told her the same thing. He'd forgiven her years ago, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The truth he didn't say out loud was that he still remembered how hollow he had felt when she made that careless wish. He still heard those words like a faint echo in the back of his mind whenever he thought about setting a table for just the two of them. Even after she stopped speaking to that coworker completely, even after the man left the company entirely, Daniel's hands stayed idle when it came to cooking for her alone. People online had their own thoughts when Daniel shared his story later. One commenter wrote, "It's time to let it go. Your wife made the effort. She's been holding the weight of your resentment for years. You've grown as a cook. Now it's time to grow emotionally." Daniel tried to explain himself. He wrote, "I am emotionally close with my wife, but with this, I can't bring myself to do it. She almost destroyed my love for cooking that night. I barely held on." His sister had said something to him early on that stuck, for better or worse. If you open your heart to someone and they stomp on it, you never repeat that mistake. She had taught him to cook, but only because he promised he'd never cook for Claire again. It was strange, wasn't it? He loved Claire deeply, but his own conscience wouldn't allow him to make her a meal. More comments came. Some told him he hadn't really forgiven her. Some told him therapy might help. Others accused him of lying to himself, clinging to the wound. One said, "You cook for everyone but her. That's cold." The words landed harder than he expected. Finally, after reading so many voices telling him he was wrong, Daniel made a choice. He walked into the kitchen that morning and told Claire he would cook for her that night, a real dinner, just for her. She hugged him tight, tears springing to her eyes, whispering thank you again and again. He felt nervous and strangely hopeful about opening this new chapter. But even as he planned the meal, he reminded her, gently but firmly, of that night 2 years ago. How she had almost destroyed his love for cooking, how deep the cut had been. And he offered an analogy, something his sister had suggested earlier, hoping it would make her understand the impact of what she had said. Daniel stood in the kitchen, the weight of the past 2 years pressing down on him as he stirred the pot. He had finally decided to cook for Claire again, but even now, his heart carried bruises from words that never quite faded. He tried to explain his hurt to her one last time, offering an analogy his sister had suggested earlier that morning. He asked Claire how she would feel if he drunkenly admitted to preferring hugs from an old childhood friend named Lauren, because Lauren's hugs felt softer, more feminine. He asked if she would be able to forget that comment, even if he apologized for the rest of his life. Claire's face tightened, her breath catching in her throat. Quietly she admitted she wouldn't. She apologized again, as she had countless times before, for the comment she had made about wishing her coworker could cook for her. Daniel nodded, trying to let the apology land, but there was a sadness in his eyes that wouldn't leave. Even so, there was a flicker of hope beneath it all. He set the table carefully, pulling out plates they rarely used, placing 2 glasses of chilled white wine beside them. He was making her lemon butter lobster risotto, a dish that felt almost ceremonial, a symbol of effort, of love, and maybe of forgiveness he hadn't fully found yet. "I hope it turns out good," he muttered under his breath, though it sounded more like a prayer than a joke. This was supposed to be the moment that turned the page, that opened a new chapter. But even in his nervous excitement, there was a shadow. The analogy he had used lingered in the air, unsettling and strange. Commenters later would pick it apart. One said, "Wow, that was weirdly specific." Another added, "You don't see what's happening. Your sister has been pulling strings all along. She told you not to cook for Claire, and now she's feeding you these analogies." Others were harsher. "Wrong analogy to use," one wrote bluntly. "You talked about finding your best friend more attractive than your wife, and worse, you compared her hugs. What do you think your wife will think every time she sees you hug that friend now? That was cruel." Someone else pointed out, "She talked about liking a coworker's food. You talked about liking the body of your best friend. That's not the same. You could have used a hobby as an analogy, but instead, you planted a seed of doubt in her mind." And another voice, sharper still, wrote, 2 years of punishment wasn't enough? You had to drop that cherry on top?" Daniel read those words later, sitting alone at the edge of his bed. He thought about how, in the beginning, Claire's comment had felt like a careless wound, but how his own choices, his silence, and even his clumsy attempts at explanation had left scars too. That night he served the risotto. It was warm, rich, and made with love, but beneath every bite lay years of unsaid things. In real life, stories like Daniel and Claire's are painfully common. Small thoughtless words can slice deeper than we expect, and when the hurt festers, it can become something that shapes years of silence, resentment, and distance. When trust cracks, it's not always a single moment that mends it. It's 1,000 small efforts, and sometimes a painful awareness of how we might also be part of the damage. If you've been hurt by someone you love, or if you've hurt them, don't let years slip by in avoidance. Talk, not to win an argument, but to be heard. Seek therapy if you need help untangling the emotions that feel too heavy to carry alone. Remember that apologies only work if they're met halfway by a willingness to forgive, and forgiveness only matters if it's paired with real change. Most of all, learn to pause before you speak, and ask yourself if the words you're about to say are ones you'd want remembered years later, because sometimes they will be.